Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Chullin daf Dalet Chullin 4. We're going to start on Gimel Mabez, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is going to cite a brayso about whether or not a kuti is able to do a shlita. A kuti is somebody who is suspected of not being really Jewish because their conversion is in doubt. They were Geirei Arayis. They converted presumably only because the lions were threatening to kill them. So yesterday we said that Abaye said that al kuti can shecht even lechatchila, even initially, as long as there is a Jew omed al gabav standing over, watching him. Whereas Rava says he could do it even lechatchila as long as the Jew is even just yotze v'nichnas. He's just going in and out, but he doesn't have to be there the whole time. The Gemara cites a brayso, and at first glance, this brayso doesn't really work smoothly with either Abaye or Rava. So Tan Rabbanan shlitas kuti muteris says the shlita of a kuti is permitted. When a Jew is standing next to him, that's like what Abaye says. But if he comes along and finds that it was slaughtered, he cuts off a piece of meat and gives it to him. If he eats from it, mutar lo achol mishlitaso. If he eats from it, you can give it to him to eat from his slaughter, meaning to say, because as we said yesterday, that since the kuti eats from it, we can trust him. But from the concluding clause, we see that b'di'eved, you could just give it to him to taste, and that's what Rava said yesterday. And now like Abaye. So kayotze, but first the Gemara gives another example where matzah biyado dekuria shalti param. You found a string of birds. Tosfos says a basket of birds of the kusi. Kotea rosha shel echaman v'nosero. You could chop off the head of one of the birds, even though it's different animals. Before it was just one animal. Here it's different animals. You could just chop off the head of one of the birds and give it to him to eat. If he eats from it, you can rely upon him. Otherwise, you can't. So Abaye diek beresha. Abaye, who said yotze v'nichnas is not allowed. So by shlita, by a kusi, he learns out from the first clause, which says that you have to be omed al gabav. Rava diek misefa, but Rava, who says that it's okay where you came in and you found it. If he eats from it, it's okay. He learned it out from the Seifa. So basically, Abaye diek miresha, Rava diek misefa. Abaye diek miresha. Now he learns in the first clause that why is it okay? Time of the Yisrael omed al gabav, because the Jew is standing next to him. But if the Jew is just going in and out, it wouldn't be sufficient. And Rava diek misefa, Rava learns out from the last clause, time of the bal matzah sheshachut. What's the reason why it's b'di'eved? It's because he found it already slaughtered. But if you're going in and out, it would be satisfactory even l'chatchila. So the Gemara says, "O Abaye kasha seifa." How does Abaye explain the last clause? Amrocha yotze v'nichnas nami bo matzo karle. So Abaye would say, yeah, the case of the last case where we say it's okay b'di'eved, that's what it's referring to when it says you came and you found it slaughtered. That's because that is exactly what Yotze v'nichnas says, that you come in and you find it slaughtered. Well, Rava kasha reisha. Well, how does Rava explain that? L'chatchila, it says omed al gabav in the first clause. Amrocha Yotze v'nichnas namek omed al gabav. So Rava says no. Yotze v'nichnas is the equivalent of omed al gabav. Meaning, it just means that the omed al gabav is to make sure that he's afraid that you're watching and that he's not going to mess it up. So Yotze v'nichnas is the equivalent of making him that afraid. The second part of the brayso says, "Kayotze bo matzav yada dekori shel tziparon koter rosho." So the Gemara says that you're allowed to chop off the head of one of the birds and feed him. If he eats it, it's okay. Amai. So why is that okay? Shapir. Maybe not all of them were slaughtered good, but this one was slaughtered good, and the other ones he'll allow you to eat because, as Rashi said, as we said yesterday, he's not worried about lifnei iver otite mechshol. So why are you allowed to just give him one of the birds to eat, and why is that sufficient? So Gemara says, Amarav Menashe, Siman Machnis Izem al Bezacharim, or in Dalad Amad Aleph in the middle. So he says that what's the scenario here? You stuck all the birds under your jacket, so he doesn't know which one was on the top. So therefore, if he eats it, it means he thinks all of them are kosher. So Amar Misharsha. So excuse me, Gemara says, why is that approved? Maybe he had a sign on the bird, and he can tell from the bird which one of it was kosher. So Amar Misharsha. No, the memasmes le misamuse. You chopped up all the birds, so there's no possible way for there to be a simon. So that's the fact that he eats it. It's sufficient for you to eat it. Where it says, but how do we know this? Maybe the only reason why the kuti is eating from those birds is because he's on the position in shchita ofman Torah. The shchita is not said explicitly by a bird in the Torah. It's said by a ben bakar, shachadas ben bakar. So therefore, maybe the kuti who doesn't take the text literally, doesn't rely, who takes the text literally, doesn't rely upon oral law. Maybe he's going to be in the position that there is no shlita for ofman Torah, and so that's why he's eating it. Maybe he says birds don't require shlita, and where it says, well, tamech, according to your logic, the 5 classic psuei shlita, they're also not written in the Torah. Shehi dras chalada grama igor. These are the 5 classic disqualifications of the shlita. We'll say it again, even though we said it a couple of times already. Shia is pausing during the shlita. Drasa is chopping. Chalada is borrowing. The Gemara is going to discuss. That means the knife is covered at some point. Agrama is outside of the zone. Either you slaughter it above or below the place where it's supposed to be slaughtered. Again, there's a dispute. And Ikor is yanking. Instead of cutting it, you yank out the simanim. So, Amikas Mina, those aren't men, but yet we're going to rely upon them that they did the shlita according to those laws. And this is the line that's going to impact us for the rest of the daf. Since the kutim kept this mitzvah, we have a presumption that they keep this mitzvah. Since they kept it, they kept it. And so too, we're going to say, keeping the echsiku. Since we have a presumption that they keep the laws of shlita by a bird, therefore we assume that they kept it. Rashi said, okay, fine, not yet, Rashi. So the Gemara says, whether or not we can rely upon them where something is not explicitly written in the Torah, that's a dispute amongst the Tanaim. Rashi says a mitzvah that's not explicitly written in the Torah, and we see that they keep it. Do we say, since they keep it for themselves, we can also rely upon it for ourselves to rely upon them? Or do we say, even though they keep it for themselves, we can't rely on it? Meaning to say, the fact that they do it is not enough. That's a dispute amongst the Tanaim. Tanya, because we learned in the Brayso, matzahs kusi muteris. The matzah of a kusi is permitted. And a person fulfills his obligation with that matzah on Pesach. That's the first opinion of the Brayso. The second opinion is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer oser l'fisha ein b'kiyim b'tiktukei mitzvos k'Yisrael. He prohibits the matzah of a kusi because he says they're not strict with the precise mitzvos like a Jew. They don't know all the details of the mitzvah, and so therefore we can't rely upon them. And Rashbag Omer kol mitzvos she'echziku b'kusim. Rashbag says all the mitzvos that the kusim do, harbe medaktikim ba'yotzer Yisrael. They do it better than the Jews. They're more precise. So meaning we could rely upon them. So let's analyze this brayso. Amar Mar, we still haven't shown exactly we haven't shown the proof that echzak below echzak below ksivi is a tanahi. But now the Gemara is going to analyze the brayso and break it down, and then we'll see the proof. Amar Mar, matzahs kusi muteres, adam yotze b'yidei chavasa b'pesach. Shita, it's obviously the case that if the matzah of kusi is permitted, for sure you can fulfill your obligation. The Gemara says no. You might have said that they know how to make it so it's not chometz, but they don't know how to make it so that with the proper intent. They didn't know how to watch it to fulfill the obligation. Means it's not enough on Seder night to just have matzah that's not chometz. You have to have matzah that you watch for the purpose of the mitzvah. And so, according to the Tanna Kama, the kuti you can even rely upon that he does the shimur properly. Rabbi Eliezer oser v'she'im b'kiyim b'diktukei mitzvos, because he's of the position kasaver will b'kiyim b'shimur. He says they don't know how to do the shimur, whereas Rashbag says So what's the distinction between Rashbag and the Tanakama? They're both saying the matzah of the kusi is allowed. Rashbag hainu Tanakama. Where it says Ika benayu dechsiva below ichsikuba. So now we're going to say this is the machokas. If something is not written that we're trying to understand earlier, that we said this is a machokas amongst the Tanaim, something that they kept, but it wasn't written. So that's going to be the dispute here. Ika benayu diksiva. It's written in the Torah, but we don't have a presumption. Tanakama savar kiven diksiva, since the mitzvah of matzah's Torah. Afagav delo ichzikuba. Even though we don't know if they keep it, we can rely upon them. Look at Rashi. Milsa diksiva ba'oraisa. Something is written in the Torah, but we don't know that they keep it. Tanakama. Excuse me. The Tanakamas are the position. Duo Iri bechazaka klal aksiva de'oraisa kapid. Vitana matzav hu adon klal ksuvim Torah. Even though we don't know if they keep it, we can rely upon them. Since it's written, we can rely upon them. But Rabbi Eliezer is going to be of the position, even if they keep it, because they don't know the precision of the mitzvot. So the Tanakama says, even though it's written, we can rely on them, even though we don't have a chazak. And Rabbi Eliezer says, even if they have a chazaka, they don't know the mitzvot. So that's the dispute that we suggested above. So the Gemara says, Rashbag savar ichsok in lo saklo. Rashbag says, no, we need, if they have a chazaka, it's okay. Otherwise, it's not okay. So if that's the case, according to Rashbag, why does it say, it doesn't say any mitzvah that they keep. According to Rashbag, it should say, if they keep it. So therefore, we have to say, so it's not like we said anything that was written without a chazaka. The whole thing is, and now we finally get to what we suggested above was a dispute where it was not written. So that's the case where it's not written in the Torah, but they have a chazaka about it. Tanakama savar kiven the lo ksivi. The Tanakama says, since it's not written, afot gav dirchsikuba namilo. So the Tanakama saw the position that even though it's not written, even though there's a chazaka on it, we cannot rely upon it. So that's the Tanakama's position. That even though it's not written, even though there's a chazaka upon it, we can't rely on it. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel savar keeping the echsuk is echsuk. Shimon Gamliel says since there's a chazaka, we can rely upon it. So the Tanakama says it needs to be written, but if it's not written, even there's a chazaka, we can't rely upon it. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. If there's a chazaka, there's a chazaka. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says we can't rely upon them. And so that from here we see that the idea of if there's a chazaka but it's not written, that's a dispute amongst the Tanakama, Rabbi Eliezer, and Shimon Gamliel. So now let's analyze part of the discussion we've been having till now. Kufa, we learned yesterday's daf. Amar Rava Yisrael, or actually, this was on Beis Amabez at the bottom. We had the statement of Rava Yisrael Mumar Ochel Nevelos L'Teyavon, that if there's a Jew who's a Mumar to eat the non-kosher food because he has an appetite for it, Bodik Sakim, he knows him. We inspect the knife and we give it to him, Mutar Lechol Mishchitaso, and then we can eat from his shlita. So Gemara says, my timer. What's the reason why we could then eat from his slaughter if he's a Mumar Ochel Nevelos L'Teyavon? So we say, Kivan de Ika Heteira V'Isura, because once we check the knife, since he has in front of him to do it in a permitted manner, or he could always leave the knife and do it in a prohibited manner, well, Shavak Heteira V'Achol Isura. He's not going to, since he's only doing it, it's like, if it's more convenient, he's not going to abandon the permitted manner and follow the prohibited manner. The Gemara says, Nami. So then why do we have to inspect the knife? He's not going to go out of his way to do it in a prohibited manner. So the Gemara says, Mitrachot Tarach, because he's not going to go out of his way if the knife is nicked to fix the knife. It's a pain in the neck to fix the knife. So he's not going to go out of his way to get a proper knife. So Amalei Rabbanan or Rabba. So this is the position of Rabba. They could just check the knife and give it to him. Rabbanan said to Rabba, they tried to help him. Tayin the Messiah, I'll give you a source for your opinion. Now, if somebody is a mummer for teyavo, and you could just check the knife and give it to him and rely upon it. What's the source? Let's say there was a sinner, that they didn't want to get rid of their Pesach. They didn't want to get rid of their chametz on Pesach. They didn't eat the chametz, but they kept it in their home. They didn't want to take the loss. So now it's after Pesach. The Brisa says, mutter on the top of 4b, you're allowed to eat it miyad, immediately, right after Pesach, even though you didn't wait the time to bake new ones. You could eat the bread he has right there. Why? Because it's still permitted right away. Because right away we assume he switched it with the non-Jew, because he said, why should I do a bigger sin? I'll do a lesser sin. And at this point, I'll minimize my sin. I'll just switch it with the idolatry. With the idolater. So we see from here that he's going to do the lesser sin. And Savrua, the rabbis who try to cite this as a position, try to say, money Rabbi Yehuda. This is consistent with the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says chametz achar Pesach deraisa. The chametz after Pesach is biblically prohibited. And still we're going to say that it's permitted. That we assume he switched it out. Why? Because he says he can do it in a permitted manner. So why should he do it in a prohibited manner? That's a proof for the same logic of Rava's position that you could give the shlita to a person who's not trusted himself to always eat kosher. So the Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know that this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda? Maybe this brisa is the position of Rabbi Shimon. It says that it's only rabbinically prohibited to eat the chametz that a Jew owned on Pesach. And we're only lenient by rabbinic, person violates a rabbinic sin. But the Araisa, like somebody who eats the nevela, the carcass, and non-kosher food, maybe we wouldn't be lenient. So the Gemara says, no, just the opposite. If you want to say it's Rabbi Shimon, it's even bigger proof. Tiave nami Rabbi Shimon. Even if you want to say it's Rabbi Shimon, who says it's only rabbinic prohibition. Mikatani sha'ani omer achlifu. It doesn't say that I say that they switched it in the Brisa. It says mipnei shemachlifin katani, because they would go and switch it out. The vadei machlifin, because they for sure would switch out their chametz to get the chametz of the idolater, which is not prohibited. And we would say ma'bed rabbanon will shavakitera. If it's a rabbinic prohibition, and they still want to make sure they're not going to do it in a prohibited manner, for sure in a biblical manner, they're going to go out of their way to make sure they did it right. You see, the Gemara here is going into the mentality of the sinner. And he's saying the guy is a sinner, but he doesn't want to do the sin. He'd rather if he's going to make sure he doesn't violate a rabbinic sin, for sure he's not going to violate the biblical sin. So again, we're still trying to find the proof for Rava, who says that you're allowed to give the knife, check the knife, give it to the person who eats non-kosher food, and ask him to do the shechita on your behalf. Let's bring a proof from Rava from the following brisa. It says, "Akol shochten va'afilu kusi." Everyone can slaughter, even the kusi, even va'afilu arel, even a Jew who doesn't circumcise, va'afilu Yisrael mumar, and even a Jew who's a mumar. Mumar is a sinner. Now, hi arel. So let's see what this brisa is referring to. When it says the Jew is uncircumcised, hey chidami, what are we referring to? If we're talking about a guy who's got a very good excuse that his brothers died during circumcision, and therefore he's exempt from circumcising himself. Hi Yisrael Ma'al. Well, of course he can do the slaughter. He's done nothing wrong. He's a perfectly good Jew. Now, Pshita must be we're talking about that. Who's the one who can do this shlita? Or mumar la'arelos. Is the guy who's a sinner with respect to this one sin of not circumcising himself. Because savar mumar l'davar echad loving mumar kol Torah kula. And we say that even though he's a sinner for this one area, we trust him in other areas, and he can do the shlita. Ema seifa, but the next clause says, "Vayifilu Yisrael mumar," and the next clause says, even a Jew who's a mumar can do the shlita. Now, hi mumar hechidami. What type of sinner is he? Mumar l'davar acher. If you want to say he's a sinner for some other sin, one of the other prohibited activities, no. Why would the Gemara just repeat the same exact concept I just said about a mumar for circumcision? Hainu mumar la'arelos. So it must be ela mumar also davar. It must be that even though he's a sinner for that matter, i.e., for eating non-kosher food, we are allowed to give him the shlita ukedarava. And this is Rava's position. And even though he's a sinner for not eating kosher food, we could give him the knife and tell him to slaughter it. The Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Whoa, I might say that if he's a sinner for that specific sin, we wouldn't rely upon him. Why? Even the dashba, because once he does that sin of not eating non-kosher food, we have a concept when it comes to committing a sin, that the more you do it, the more you think it's actually allowed and you're not even committing a sin. And that's what Gemara and Yoma says. Keeping the dashba ketera damilei. No, because that sin, we might say, he eats non-kosher food so much time, he thinks it's actually permitted. And when somebody was talking to me last week, and he said, yeah, he went out to dinner with some Persian people, and the Persians they keep strict kosher, these Jews who are from Persia. And then he saw that they ordered chicken in the non-kosher restaurant. He said, what are you doing? They said, no, chicken doesn't need shlita. That's like this. You think you commit the sin so many times, you think it's permitted. It's not permitted just because in your mind it is. So we might say that this is still prohibited. Keeping the dashba ketera damilei. So what does it mean when it says mumar? It does not a proof of Rava. It means that even though he's a sinner for idolatry, mumar avodas kochavim, and like a kedamar Rav Anan Amar Shmuel Yisrael mumar avodas kochavim mutar le'achol mishchitaso. Even though the Jew is a sinner for idolatry, which we said elsewhere is like a sinner for the whole Torah. That somebody who's a sinner for idolatry, it's like they're a sinner for the whole Torah. Nevertheless, you can eat from his slaughter. And now the Gemara is going to analyze. So it's not a proof for Rava from that brisa. And now the Gemara is going to analyze the statement of Shmuel that whether, like Rav Anan said in the name of Shmuel, whether somebody who's a sinner for idolatry, you can eat from his slaughter. And the Gemara is going to bring an example from Tanakh, because in Tanakh, the one of the biggest sinners of all is King Achav, and King Achav served first Yehoshaphat food, and then also Elijah the prophet, and they both seemingly ate from it. So that proves Rav Anan's point, seemingly, that even though you're a sinner for idolatry, you could eat from that man's slaughter. So the Gemara says, "Gufa Amar Rav Anan Amar Shmuel Yisrael Mumar Avodas Kochavim Mutar Echol Mishchitaso Shekei Matzinu Bi Yehoshaphat Melch Yehuda." Yehoshaphat was a righteous king of Judah, and Achav wanted to get Yehoshaphat to join together with him in going out to battle. So Achav was the king of Israel, and they made a shidduch between them, and he wanted to get Yehoshaphat to side with him to battle against Aram. And so he made him a big party to try to get him to fight with him, to fight on his team. So, and we see that Yehoshaphat, even though he was a tzaddik, he ate from Achav's food. He ate from the meal of Achav, as it states, so it says Achav made a slaughter of sheep and cattle for many people, and for the people that were with him, and he convinced him to go up to Ramot Gilad. So that proves that Yehoshaphat ate from the slaughter of the idolater. The Gemara says, what kind of proof is that? It never says he ate. It says Vayisiteo ksiv. So the Gemara says, yeah, it says he seduced him, he convinced him. Yeah, but maybe Vidilma Bidvarim. Maybe that doesn't mean with food. Maybe it means you only convince him with words. So the Gemara says, no. You don't convince anybody with words. You got to have a kiddush. You don't just convince somebody with words. You convince somebody with food. Gemara says, really? It says in the Torah, the sin of the masis, the inciter, he incites you. The Gemara says, no, he gives you food and drink. That's how he gets you in the door. He wines and dines you. Gemara says, really? But it states about God that Satan incited him to test Job. Gemara says, okay, yeah, so the Satan incited God. God doesn't eat. Fine, that case is different. Okay, fine, you need food. But maybe Achav gave Yehoshaphat to drink. But Achav maybe didn't give him to eat. Gemara says, well, if he's drinking, then he's also eating because there's drinking is also prohibited. Maishna shtia, no, why would you think drinking is different? Why would he drink from it? Because you say it's not prohibited wine. Meaning to say, if he's going to be prohibited, if he's going to allow himself to drink the prohibited wine, he'll for sure also allow himself to eat from the food. The Gemara says, no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same. Shtia is stam yenanu. The drinking is just a prohibition of a decree that wine, you don't know that the wine had a libation on it, but yet we prohibit it. But that was a rabbinic decree. That was a later decree. In the time of Achav, it wasn't prohibited. But by eating, I'll say to you, maybe he'll be allowed to drink the wine, but still not allowed to eat from the food. So isn't the fact that Yoshafat ate from the food a proof for Rav Hanan in the name of Shmuel? Gemara says no. Ibai is saying he ate from it. Why? Lav Urcha, either you could say Lav Urcha the Malka Mishtaya Mecha. The king's not just going to give you drink and not food. He gave him food. Ibai is saying Vayizbach Vayisiteo Ksiv. But Ma'isiteo Bezvicha. The pasuk says he slaughtered and then he convinced him. How did he convince him with food? Gemara says, but okay, fine. He gave him food to eat. But maybe the food was kosher. He had a mashkiach. We know that the prophet Ovadia was a righteous prophet, but he was like a secret agent amongst the camp of Achav. So maybe Vidilma Ovadia zavach. Maybe Ovadia did the shlita. It can't be. Larov ksiv. It says he did a lot. He did a shlita for many people. Ovadia lo ave safek. Ovadia is not going to slaughter 1,000 cows by himself. Vidilma shivas alafim zavuach. Well, we know that there were 7,000 righteous people in the time of Achav. Maybe they're the ones who did the shlita. D'chsiv b'sharti b'Yisrael shivas alafim. There were 7,000 Jews who didn't bow down to Baal. So the Gemara say, and no, it wouldn't have been them. Why? They were in hiding. They weren't coming out to the party. But maybe Achav himself had some good people. No, we couldn't say that. Moshel Makshiv Aldvar Sheker Kol Mishar Tav Rishayim. If there's a wicked ruler, all of his servants are wicked. V'dilma Gavri Dio Shafat Nami Loavi. Gemara says V'dilma, but maybe Gavri Dio Shafat Nami Loavi Mao. Maybe Yoshafat's men weren't good. Maybe they ate from the non-kosher food. Zavuach Gavri the Achav. And maybe Achav's men slaughtered it, and Yoshafat's men ate that. And Zavuch Avadia and Achal Yoshafat. Maybe Yoshafat was the only one away from Avadia Shlita. Gemara says, no, that can't be. Yoshafat's men were also righteous. Gemara says, V'dilma Zavuch Gavri Achav, Achav V'Gavri. Maybe what happened was that Achav's men slaughtered for Achav's crew, and Yoshafat's men slaughtered for Yoshafat's crew. Gemara says no. They're not going to go and be invited to the party and say, "I'm going to bring out my own kosher food in my own tins." That's not shayach. So okay, we'll stop here and pick this up. We'll pick this up from tomorrow's daf. We'll stop here because it goes on, and I want to finish on time today. Baruch Hashem. We'll pick this up tomorrow. But where are we stopping? We're stopping with the idea that Rav Hanan says in the name of Shmuel that if a mumar who's eating somebody who eats non-kosher food, he says you can rely on his food, and we were trying to bring a proof from the fact that Yoshafat ate from the meal of Achav. Okay, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem. And we will continue